everyone, I'm Aubrey. I'm the Global Diversity Lead at Atlassian. We're an Australian software company, but we have offices in Soma. And I'm talking about what I think of as my personal passion in the work I do. So I have a colleague that is a big fan of asking hard questions. And one time they asked me, if you could give more of something to everyone in the world that wasn't money, that would make the world better, what would you give them? And immediately I said empathy. Because I think at the end of the day, the more empathetic we are, the easier we find it to help those around us. And I think that's absolutely critical. Oh, it's not on. Can you not hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. So I think that having empathy is absolutely the first component to really successfully fostering diversity and inclusion, right? We want to understand other people's experiences, especially when they're not like our own. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about how do I make someone have an authentic, empathetic response to my story or a story of one of their colleagues. There's a ton of research on empathy that, scholars in psychology have done. So first, what is empathy? Empathy is just identification or living vicariously through someone else's experiences. And then you want to say, why can't I just do that naturally? Why don't we all automatically empathize with people around us? Well, there are actually psychological blockers that cause us to not be as empathetic as we could be. The first is we tend to think of empathy as a fixed quality. We tend to say, I'm high empathy, I'm low empathy, that's it, right? So it's not something we work on, we think it's something that exists. Maybe it's an emotion. Now, when we're talking about who needs to be empathetic when we're doing diversity work, it's everyone. We tend to think really easily of the people that are in majority groups, right? They need to have empathy for people that are in underrepresented groups of some way, understand the unique struggles that they have. But I argue that there's the second group we have to think about. That's if you're in an underrepresented group, you need to have empathy for what it looks like to try to understand that experience totally outside of your own. And if you're having that empathetic response, you're going to create space for people to learn. They're going to get things wrong, but it's going to be forgiven. They're going to be really engaged in learning about those underrepresented experiences. And then for me, what I'm actually going to talk about is how I structure what I call ally conversations. And if you're coming into an ally conversation, you need to be able to have empathy for the person you're sitting down with. Understand why they haven't engaged with diversity and inclusion before. Understand why they might be nervous about it, why they're afraid, why they think they're going to ask a stupid question and someone's going to call them racist or misogynist. That can be really scary. So we need to have two-way empathy going all the time. What are our biggest challenges? The first, psychological literature tells us we're actually not very good at having empathy for a large group. If you heard the saying, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic, our brains actually don't process huge numbers very well, and we also like to feel pleasant a lot of the time. So when you think about 1 million deaths or 1 million people being discriminated against, that feels really bad, and so we're going to disengage. Right? We're going to set that aside and say, oh, that's not me. That's not my situation. We're much better at looking at that person, one person, and understanding how to empathize with their unique experience. The second bias we have is pretty simple. We're better at empathizing with people like us. We understand their experiences already, so we don't have to stretch very much to have empathy for that. And the third thing is psychological sorting. We, in general, prefer people that are already like us, and we tend to surround ourselves with people like us. So we're not actually working out that empathy muscle very much. If I'm surrounded by all women, for example, because I'm female identified, I'm not actually spending a lot of time interacting with men. I don't know what that experience is like. So I put myself in a homogenous network. I already prefer being around people like me, and when I think about that big group of other people, I'm less likely to care about it if I don't know that one person. I think we all have been there, either because we're minorities ourselves, or we have somebody we care about, right, that's a minority, and we know this is true. Judges that have daughters tend to be more pro-female. CEOs that have daughters also tend to support more work policies that are supportive of women and working mothers, right? We connect to one person that we care about. So now what happens when you sit down? I do this at work all the time. I'll get an email from someone that says, hey, I kind of want to get involved, but I have no idea what to do. A lot of times this is younger men, white men, who say, I get that this is good, but I don't really understand what the problem is or how I can solve it. So I I'm running out of time, but I'll tell you. The good news is there's 3 qualities of empathy that I think make this actually a lot easier. And the first is that empathy is a choice. When you tell people that they have the choice to be empathetic, they overwhelmingly do. You tell them that it's not a fixed quality. And that's the second thing. Empathy is changeable. We can work it out in the same way that we lift weights if we want to get stronger, or we run distance, we can eventually get to a marathon. The third thing is it's transferable. We're really good at learning by analogies. So having one authentic, empathetic experience actually increases the likelihood that you'll have it again in a different setting. So I have 4 rules for ally conversations. The first is your ground rules. When you sit down, I call it the circle of trust. As the person who's having this conversation, I say, trust me that I will judge nothing that happens during this conversation, and I will trust that you are coming here in the spirit of education. As long as you're asking something because you want to learn, it's the best question you can ask me. No matter if you've heard that it's an offensive question, it's not in this situation. Creating a safe space for them to really learn. The second thing is start with your story. Talk about either what your experience is like as a minority or what moment really caused you to care about these issues. Someone that's talking to you is going to connect to that, right? I have a female colleague that came in and wanted to talk about Ferguson and the shootings in Charleston, and she started with the statistics and the news stories, and everybody kind of shut off. And then a couple of minutes later, she gets in and she says, it was really hard for me to come to work the next day. Right? I am black in America, and that hurts. And suddenly, everyone is there asking what they can do, right? Because they care about her. But it's hard to understand what structural racism looks like and what you can do. So start with your story. Offer where you've messed up. Make yourself vulnerable. The third thing is use analogies. So how often have we done thought experiments where we say, well, imagine this is happening to your sister, or your friend, or your cousin, right? And they understand that they would dislike it if it happened to that person, and say, well, what about your colleague? Why is that different? You see this light bulb go on, right? They're like, oh, it's not different. But it takes a second, and we have to frame it so that they understand that this is really connected to them. And the last thing is ask for one action. So people are less likely to be empathetic if they think they have to do a lot. These studies generally focus on money donations. If they think you're going to ask for money or do a bunch of stuff, we kind of shut off. But say, I just want you to do one thing tomorrow. Can you try to make sure that you publicly commend your female colleagues because they get punished when they advocate for themselves? Can you just say thank you or congratulations to that person? When something big happens in the news, like Charleston, and you have a black colleague, maybe check in and say, are you okay? I'm sure that was rough. Can I help you do something today? And that's it. Ask for one action at first and see how it perpetuates. And this conversation is just the beginning. This is bringing people into the conversation. So the last thing for you is be patient. Growing empathy takes time. But letting people be accountable and giving them spaces where they can be empathetic is really important, and telling them it's okay to mess up as they go along. But as long as they keep asking questions, how did this land with you? Are you doing okay? Are you ready for the next step? Those things I have found create really meaningful engagement, people that are really excited to do things like volunteer for career fairs and mentor and things like that. So I think approaching those conversations in this very open way, you actually end up creating people who are long-term allies to this sort of diversity and inclusion mission in tech. So thank you so much. I'm happy to talk about this more. But thank you.